Hey, folks, welcome to another episode of the Change Physician Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, and I'm here with my fabulous co-host, Dr. Melissa Katie. Dr. Katie, how are you this morning?
I'm great. I'm trying to figure out your voice, though.
My voice. This is my late night radio voice. Doesn't it sound late night and soothing?
Fascinating.
No, you're just looking at me.
I'm not digging it. But
you're not digging it. All right, fine. I'll go back to my radio.
But variety is a good, spice of life. So
with this, as the change physician, we need to change our intros and maybe change our approach and maybe, add in a little bit more of that professional. I'm going to start doing that from now on. I'm going to try to find some professional sounding voices and test them all out until it's Melissa Katie approved. But for this particular episode, folks, what I really want to talk about was not radio voices and not radio introductions, but really was the difference between being frugal and being cheap. And this sort of came out of a discussion I had with my wife, actually. And it sort of is related to another episode that we just did about the difference between something that what really matters when it comes to junk, what really matters when it comes to junk inferring physical stuff. Yeah, and this comes down to being cheap. So, because my wife had said something like, this is going to sound so horrible. Oh, I can't do it. So
we're vulnerable on this podcast.
We have, because when it comes to Christmas time, my wife likes the smell of the pine needles. And so we always get the pine needle wreath. Well, said pine needle wreath, it is May 2nd. Said pine needle wreath is on our front door still. And so
she likes the smell.
My comment was, we should probably get rid of this thing because now it is so dried out. I think it's fallen apart. And her thing is, but it smells so good. And then that made me think of, well, what we really need is maybe we need like seasonal wreaths. So there should be a company that has seasonal wreaths that you can buy and maybe they ship them to your house. And I'm thinking, because I do like the smell of something that would walk in your door, but you can have your spring wreath, you can have your summer wreath, you can have your fall wreath, you can have your winter wreath. And she's like, oh, probably someone's doing that. And I'm just too cheap to buy it. And so I was like, well, in that situation, then I'm not sure if that's necessarily cheap. It's just not important to you. So I kind of think about the difference in being cheap and frugal is if you are being cheap is when you're not willing to purchase things that are important to you. And being frugal is having a high standard for things that are important, like that only purchasing things that provide value. And I think that's an important characteristics because especially in a lot of the physician forums where I talk about FIRE, financially independent, retire early. And there's this extreme view. In fact, there's an entire website on that, early retirement extreme, where the guy was living on like $9,000 a year, something ridiculous, but you live on nothing, like nothing. And for some people that's great. But if that kind of extreme, I don't want to say frugality, but when you find yourself as like, you're not willing to pay or invest the money into things that create a important experiential event for you. So to me, that implies cheapness. It's like, okay, people say don't buy coffee. Like, don't go to Starbucks if you can brew at home. We brew our coffee at home. I have no desire to go to a coffee shop. Absolutely none. I like our coffee. It makes me happy. And for me, not spending the money there is not a deficit in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
I know people who put a lot of attention to coffee. And that ritual, the ritual of going out for coffee every day, that's important to them.
Yeah.
And because it's important to them, I don't see that as necessarily an expense. They can be frugal in different ways by choosing what doesn't matter to not spend their money on, but really being able to identify then, you know what, this is important to me. So this comes back to this constant theme of awareness, right? Being aware that this act of going out and buying coffee is important to me. Right. And because of that, I'm willing to invest my money into that experience. And then, the problem on the other end, besides cheap and frugal, is if everything, like, you just spend it without any awareness, and then you find out that you're in debt, and then, you have all, that's a different thing. But when it really comes to being cheap versus frugal, you're not cheap to not buy things. cheap is when you're not buying things that are important to you. So I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, I it's kind of like on one of our recent episodes, just like what brings you joy, you know? And of course, you could say if you buy everything and anything without regard for what's in your checking account, you could end up in a big problem. But you know, if going to Starbucks and that ritual brings you a lot of, you look forward to that. It makes your day. It brings you joy. That sounds like a reasonable expense. And like you said, some people will cut from expenses in other areas that don't matter as much to them. Like for me, I might try to find really good deals on different types of items, whether it's clothing. Like I rarely pay full price for clothing unless there's an immediate need. Like I don't have time to find something at a good price, or it's a special event that requires a certain thing that it's not going to be on sale. Like other than that, there's no reason for me to pay full price when at some point it's going to come down. Or I got a gift card. To me, it made it like less expensive for me. So I would rather get good deals in certain aspects of my expenses, especially when you're buying more clothes than you probably need. Like it's kind of like if I'm going to eat something that's not good for me, I'm probably going to get it when it's on sale or someone gives it to me versus me go spend a lot of money for something I shouldn't be eating anyway. For the most part, but like I would rather spend money on an experience that is traveling, so I think we shift where it's important. And I don't know how you would categorize me with, you're talking about
Oh,
frugal versus
talk
cheap.
about, listen, how do you view other people then? Like, what do you define as cheap versus someone being frugal?
Um, I consider people frugal as being wise purchasers. I know it's not part of the definition. I'd actually need to probably look it up.
But I like that.
Um,
I like that. I think that makes a lot of sense, right? A wise
cheap,
purchaser.
cheap is just like stingy to me. Like you're just kind of like you're trying to pull joy away from people or yourself for whatever reason. I don't know that's my like gut feeling when you say frugal versus cheap. Cheap is like meaningless, kind of like what was the guy you think of at Christmas, like the Grinch,
No, not the Grinch. Ebenezer
like
Scrooge.
little Grinch. You're like Grinchy, you
Oh,
know?
Ebenezer Scrooge, I think, is the guy you mean, though.
Oh, is it Scrooge?
From the Christmas tale where
Yeah, I don't know the
three ghosts
stories really
come.
well.
Okay. Yeah, and
Can
he's
you
like,
tell me?
yeah, Ebenezer Scrooge is like,
So
that's the whole
Scroogey.
point.
So you're Scroogey. It's a new word. I'm making it up. So if you're cheap, you're Scroogey.
Cheap and Scroogey.
And if you're just, you're just being wise about and selective, like you have the wisdom to know like what makes sense for you to spend money on based on what's of value or brings you joy. Is that
No, I like that. I like that because it really made me think. I really like the idea that being frugal means you're a wise spender. That implies this a degree of awareness.
mm-hmm.
There's it infers then that when you are purchasing something, you're thinking of it in the bigger picture of your life and your experiences and who it values and the benefits of it. And what really struck me though when you were saying cheap is this idea of it causing harm or hurting someone.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense because it's not, I was looking at purely from, I guess, a selfish standpoint of what it meant to me. But when you think about also of the social dynamic we have, because when we're thinking about cheap, we're tending to think of others in a lot of ways. That person is cheap, and what is it that is bad about that? Is it is what you said? There's tendency to hurt. It's the person that this is going to sound kind of petty or whatever, but maybe you go out with them and then you will buy them lunch and they never return the failure, or the favor. Or maybe it's a group of people, another person that wants to know everything down to the last penny because they don't want to put a penny more into the check because, oh my gosh, if they didn't pay, 50 cents is a horrible thing. And what is in that kind of thing where it's hurting the experience for the participants, and so I really kind of like that distinguishing characteristic because it puts a different little frame on it, right?
Yeah.
So if you're spending or your lack of spending hurts others, actually there's a huge, there's a huge implication to that all over. Like that has a deepness to it that reflects on not just individual payment, but just really how you view society. right?
Yeah, it's overly cerebral, it's overly cognitive, and it's less able to tap into connecting with others and feeling, love for others. I don't know how to describe it. And when I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, even with the Scrooge idea, like he almost wanted, like the whole joy thing was kind of part of it too, like experiencing joy and connection. Like at some point he came around, but I feel like there's still that element too, even with him and that character. But from what I remember, the
I
stories,
can't believe you gotta watch that movie again.
I know, but
Uh,
there's when it comes to money or connecting, like to me, they're kind of embedded. And so, like you said, if you're frugal, you could still be giving or help it create experiences. But when you're cheap, you're almost withdrawing love and connection.
yeah, no, and I think that makes a lot of sense when you're kind of thinking about Ebenezer Scrooge as a cautionary tale. Now
Yeah.
there was an element of that as he as the employer, not really not wanting to support his employees in way, shape, or form, and almost seeing that if his employees had enough to provide joy to them and the families, he was seeing that as a detriment because he felt it was taking away from his stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I like that kind of there's a harm aspect associated with cheap that I never really had thought of, but I think that makes a lot more sense, you know?
Yeah. Well,
And
then,
yeah.
and how that applies to, physicians listening, like, I mean, really, whether it's in your personal relationships or in family, um, thinking about how maybe our actions influence, if we're not really considering the other person's feelings or what matters to them, not necessarily what just matters to us and our financial or, technical viewpoint. Um, but there's other things that matter more than just those numbers. And when you think about even your own employees, if you have employees, supporting them not just with a paycheck, but understanding what is the meaning of that paycheck to that employee. What are their dreams? What is it they want to achieve? What is it that, besides just money, what would make them feel important? So not being stingy or cheap with what you say to your employees. I mean, it's not just a money thing. It's how generous are you in your life and your work, and all of that has ramifications in the end on how they feel connected to you, and how happy they are, what the longevity of your own employees are. Not that you're responsible for everything in their life, but you can definitely elevate people by being more generous and not being, cheap.
Well, yeah, and that definitely takes things outside of the financial world
Hmm.
for sure. But like anything, there's rarely does one thing get confined to a singular domain.
Yeah.
Um, but I do think from a standpoint, if particularly if you're trying to look at freeing yourself from the burdens of debt or from the burdens of being under the sense of you cannot do something, which I think is a big concern for a lot of physicians, particularly when you're starting out. You have a lot of debt, you have all this stuff, and people are feeling trapped and
Hmm.
lack of autonomy in practice. One of the things that we do know that'll address that is being financially solvent.
Hmm.
And then when it comes to financial solvency, is the goal is to be frugal, but not to be cheap. And yeah, I really like that. That was very nice, very, very, very wise insights there
Oh.
on that. I'm like, that will be one that I will carry around with me for a long period of time. Is I keep saying it over. A wise spender. Frugal is a wise spender. Oh yeah, that's just
Oh,
perfect. It's
well,
perfect.
thanks. I didn't know how I was going to respond to your concept for this discussion, but as you said, we both think differently.
We do. Yeah, it's very, very good. Yeah.
Well,
Anyway,
cool. Well, I think this will be our short episode this week around. Is there anything else you want to touch on before we take it out?
no, because I'm just sitting here going, wow, this is just awesome. Frugal is a wise spender. Cheap means almost those who harm by not spending.
Yeah.
Don't be cheap, right?
Don't be cheap.
Don't be cheap. Frugal is great. Actually, frugal is a good value to have. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think there's a massive amount of value associated with that, but you just don't want to be cheap.
Yeah. Frugal with occasional splurges for amazing times in life is not always a bad thing either.
Well, that's still speaking for frugal, right? Because
Right.
that fits the definition of frugality as being a wise spender.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Well, since, I'll go ahead and take us on out. And Kevin had an amazing epiphany of different definition for how to decipher between being frugal or being cheap. And I absolutely agree. I think a little bit of frugality goes a long way, and not to withhold things of meaning to people when it seems fit. And so don't be cheap is kind of the essence of the message. But if anyone has any comments, would love to chime in on this discussion, feel free to reach out to us at thechangephysician.com or any of our Instagram or podcast venues. We'd love to have you part of the community, whether you're a physician or a physician ally. And remember, there's going to be a shift in some of our content that will be coming around in June, and will be very much focused on personal development as physicians or as human beings in general. So all of us can benefit, including yours truly and Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, who's here with me today. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Take care.
Stay well, folks. So this is after the episode, kind of a little discussion, but I wanted to bring this up. We didn't fit this in. I'm always looking at etymology, like not entomology, the study of insects, but etymology, which is the study of words. Words are hugely important to me, and making sure you use the right words and understanding what they mean. And then you can explore the definition of them. But I had to look up what frugal meant.
Mm.
And, we said frugal is a wise spender, but it comes from the French frugal, meaning economical in use. But there's undeclined adjective frugi, F-R-U-G-I, which means useful, proper, worthy, honest, temperate, economical, which was originally from frux, which meant fruit, produce, or figuratively to value, result, and success.
Mm.
Doesn't that sound like people have a tendency to be about frugal? There's a positivity there.
Excuse me. Yes.
That relates to sneezes. No, but no, it's just kind of interesting that the word frugal itself has this fruitfulness production. It's the idea almost like I can see almost like you're planning with your spending, you're planting seeds that are likely to grow. And how would those seeds then grow? Does it grow into an investment of wealth? Does it go into an investment of relationships? Does it go into an investment of a personal development? Does it go into an investment in health? So anyway, really cool. And still, I'm just like mind blown. Frugal, wise spender. Wow. Awesome. Anyway, that's it for after the episode.
Awesome.